you doing? Ready? We're on the clock. Good afternoon. I'm Bob Taylor. I'm a principal consultant in Premier Developer. Many of you have probably heard of Premier Field Engineering in the Premier services that Microsoft offers. They tend to focus on operate and optimize, the IT pro side of the house. I work with ISVs and with enterprise developers doing very similar things that PFEs do, but more with a development and architecture focus. So that's just a little something, give you all a little. Pardon? First name. Why is it backwards? Okay, first question I always get, and the thing that you'll never forget. So the only thing I've done longer than software development is magic, and it grew about 40 years ago. I introduced myself at a table. Somebody said their name was Bob. I, off the top of my head, said, well, my name's Bob too, but I spelled backwards. Got a laugh, and I saw the guy a couple years later, and he said, oh, you're the guy that spells your name backwards. I said, yes, Bob, I do. I just figured his name was Bob, or he wouldn't have remembered it. So that's the way I've been branded, Bob the Toolman Taylor. Anything you see of Bob spelled backwards like that, that's me. Plenty of different ways to get in contact with me after the presentation if you need it. Like I said, it was Magician. There's my avatar, blah, blah, blah. Books I've worked on as either the author or technical editor. Anyway, let's get on to the meat of the problem. SQL Server is going out of support. What are you going to do? And this is an ongoing process, and with the more rapid release cycles with our support, it's going to be a rolling problem. So what we want to do is address some of the issues that you're going to run into. How do I get from an unsupported version to a supported version? What are some of the gotchas, the pitfalls, the tools? As a matter of fact, you're going to find as I go through the day, I tend to ignore my slides, skip past them, talk about them, and I'll come back and make sure I touched on all the material. So we're going to talk about what is the process, because this is not a simple matter of throwing a CD and going next, 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 next. There's a lot more to it, or there should be a lot more to it than that. We're going to talk about the two primary options, one being in place, the other being side by side. What are the benefits of each of them? What are the risks and the rewards? We're going to talk quite a bit about some tools, tools that you may or may not have seen before, that I hope we'll do some demos of the tools that will help you do the analysis part to decide where you should be going, what kind of levels you should be shooting for, what kind of new machines you should be looking for based on your analysis. We're going to talk about testing. Yes, DBAs need to go through test cycles, just like a developer does. Most people don't bother to do this part, and this is where they get into trouble. So you should be practicing the entire process all the way through and have a run book and be able to say when it's time, okay, we need to do this in production, you've done it multiple times and you've tested the whole process. And finally, we get to the part that everybody just thinks the first and the last go together, where we just throw the CD in and now we've commissioned it and it's up and running. So let's go through some of these. Why are we going to upgrade? Well, the primary one is supportability. As of April 2016, 2005 goes out of extended support. If you've ever had to purchase our extended or our custom support, has anybody here ever done that? Healthcare folks, generally? I had some folks in 2005 that were still on NT4 and SQL 6.0. They were paying a small fortune every year in custom support. You have to pay into it for a certain price every year, and then for each incident, it's a huge cost because we don't keep developers around that have worked on that product for that long. Why? Another reason to upgrade is, let's face it, every edition of SQL Server is much better than its predecessor. Okay, I didn't hear any chuckles, so that's good. That's good. In most cases, we're introducing either new features, we're introducing better supportability, or we're providing you with a faster machine, a more performant machine. And now, with the change in the engineering that we have, where everything is being released every 4 months in the cloud and then retroactively appears in the in-box product, we're getting a lot of new features, the hybrid cloud, being able to take your availability groups, for example, and put your DR in the cloud, do your backups to the cloud. There's a lot of integration, and all of this is moving forward. I understand that there are certain industries. I work a lot with healthcare ISVs, and they are generally, the hospital-type ISVs are generally reluctant to change because a small problem and all the patients are having some issues. The ability to scale further with each new version, we follow along generally one release behind the operating system in terms of the supportability. We depend on the operating system. Therefore, as the limits of the RAM, number of CPUs, and so on expand, then we follow along. So being able to take that for your large, let's say you have a large data warehouse and you want to have, did anybody see the evolution overview with Lindsay Allen? She talked about this HP Superdome with, I forget what it was 32 cores and it was like 480 processors. Yeah, so I mean, we can support that now. So again, moving forward is generally a good idea. We have increased the amount of RAM supported on the standard edition from 64 gig to 128 gig. So that's a nice feature. You don't have to go to the enterprise to have the additional memory available. I mean, we could talk all day about things like buffer pool extensions, the new cardinality estimator, the in-memory OLTP, the column store indexes. Just the features that just keep moving forward and forward are really, really exciting, and that's a good reason to move forward. Now, do I feel like everybody should just blindly do it every time a new product comes out? Of course not. You have business justification that you have to meet, and so we have a process that we recommend you go through. So, really, we're just going to spin up another machine, back up and restore, and we're done, right? Sure. Yeah. In the early days, so I've worked on SQL since 4.2.1a when it came off the Sybase code base off of OS2 Presentation Manager. 4.2.1a up through about 6.5.7, that was probably okay. There weren't the steps to move to ANSI compliance, for example, in the earlier products. It was what it was. So things like when you moved to from 2000 to 2005 and you had to go remediate all your outer join syntax, right? No more star equals. We had to do left outer join. Those were breaking changes. And so those, from 2000 to 2005 and onwards, there are more of those gotchas that you have to be aware of. Again, the systems that are bigger and more complex. It's not necessarily that you can now turn around and pull up another 96-core, 4-terabyte machine to do a side-by-side upgrade, right? It's not everybody's got one of those sitting under their desk. So it gets harder and harder, and so the planning has to be better and better. A lot of times now, it's not just a matter of, well, can the DBA or the IT team do this? Now you have to integrate with the business, and therein lies the rub. I mean, that's generally, you generally have counter directions that you want to head. You're interested in getting the performance, the scalability, the reliability. The business is about getting the revenue and keeping the business running. So I hate to say it, but if you're not a project manager, you need to be a project manager for this kind of operation. Having an actual project, and we'll walk through the entire process, and it's an process. It can be aided by using things like Microsoft Operation Frameworks or ITIL-type principles, where you set up a project plan, you have phases, you have checkpoints and milestones. And I just need to keep track of my time. I tend to get yakking and forget what I'm supposed to be telling you. All right, let's take a look. So we say that it's going to be an iterative process. By that, I don't necessarily mean we're going to have to, well, in some cases, we're going to have to iteratively go, say, from 2000 in SP4. We may have to go to an intermediary in order to then migrate to a currently supported platform. So it's iterative in that respect, but it's also iterative in the MOF/ITIL respect. So first thing we do is we scope. Am I doing this across the enterprise? Do I have 12,000 SQL Server instances that I need to upgrade? Or am I upgrading one mission critical? Right? So first part is scoping. And we'll talk about some tooling that will help you discover the extent of your opportunity, we'll call it, to see how broad and how many servers that you're going to need to address. Then you do your initial analysis. You're going to do things like what are the metrics, how many users, what's the I/O, all those kinds of things. And then you're going to go back after you do your planning. Oh, sorry. It's not building properly. I should have my... There we go. After you do the initial analysis, you realize the problem's much bigger than you thought it was, so you go back and scope it again. And again, this is really just any iterative, agile type process. And in each cases, there's a checkpoint where you may have to go back to a previous step. And this is what we're talking about. It's iterative, not something you're going to just knock out in a weekend, probably, if it's of any scale. If it's a single application on a single database, then the scope of the problem is much smaller, and it's much more easily manageable. And let's see how many more of these I've got. There we go. Testing is part of the entire process, or it should be. Just a show of hands, how many of you are more on the DBA operational side? Halfway, straddling. How many are more on the development side? Halfway, not as many. Okay. The development side is probably going to understand the testing process as more, although many years ago it wasn't part of the process, but now in a mature application lifecycle management, you're going to have testing as built into your whole progress. And then documentation. It's really nice for you to be able to do this, do your migrations, and then you walk out the door to go to Ignite and you get hit by the beer truck. And nobody knows what happened, how you did it. So documentation becomes important as well. And those are just really tenets of a good project methodology. You have to understand the whole system. A lot of cases in the earlier days, it was a single database on a single instance, and that's all you had to worry about. Nowadays, you have things like always-on availability groups. You may have mirroring in play. You may have merge and transactional replication in play. You may have clustering. You may have geo-stretch clustering. You may have multi-subnet failovers. There's a lot more involved today. So what you really need to do is be able to go through and understand the breadth of the amount of work that you're going to have to do, and then sit down with the business owners and say, okay, this is going to take 8 hours on a Saturday. We're going to have to notify our end users on Friday night. The system's going to be down for the next 24 hours. And if we do that, we can execute X number of migrations during that time or upgrades. But it really comes down to working closely with the business owners. So if you don't do that on a regular basis in a DBA role today, it's something you're going to have to become comfortable with, which is not a bad thing. Most of them you have the same goals, really. All right, more people. Again, I tell you, I get ahead of my slides. We got to message the end users. The business is generally responsible for doing that, so you have to coordinate that. And then when something doesn't work and you roll it back, then you got to, again, notify the end users, all the messaging that's there. There we go. Scoping. How many of you have used the migration, the MAP, Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit? Small handful. Phenomenal tool. In the early days, it was kind of cobbled together from WMI scripts and, checking registry entries and all that. The Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit now is a very full-featured, robust product. I'm going to do a demo of it for you. So you'll see the kinds of capabilities it gives you. But in the past, if you were to say, the business comes to you and says, how many databases do we have? The answer was, I don't know, right? Even with SCOM and all that, trying to do the inventory management was difficult. So the map toolkit gives us a way to go out and discover not only SQL databases, but any kinds of servers. So it's a much broader tool. We're going to focus on the usage of it for SQL upgrades and migration. It will also tell you whether your database has issues if you wanted to migrate to the cloud. So it does that work for you to an extent. Okay? It's not going to go through and examine all of your code to see if you have select into temp table. Right? It's not going to do it at that level. Pitch for Premier Developer, we do have an offering called the T-SQL Practices and Readiness Checker. It's an engagement where we come in, we run it against all your databases, and it will analyze all of your T-SQL code and give you a report of any issues that would prevent you from migrating. Or if you just have poor coding practices, you're doing anti-patterns, you're using an order in a where clause or a function in the where clause, it'll do all that analysis for you. So if you're interested in that, see me afterwards, and I'd be happy to tell you about that. Again, this solves the problem of, well, Joe put in a database in his desktop underneath his desk, and we don't know about it, and because of security reasons or whatever, we need to make sure it's being patched and all that. MAP helps you to take a look at all of that. It'll also look to see if there's any showstoppers for you to migrate to a VM or to Azure, as we say. All right, let's take a look. All right, this is like a cooking show. So we already, come on, timed out, that's good. All right. So what I did is the map toolkit is, like I said, is a tool that you'll run. This will take just a second to come up. This is a free tool. Yeah, at the end, I have several resources slides. All the tools that I mentioned today, there'll be links for you to be able to go download them, as well as some other resources, TechNet, like on gotchas on SSIS or on analysis services, reporting services. So there'll be more of that at the end in the resources directory. So in this case, I have already done the inventory. The inventory process, you can imagine if you've got a domain with tens of thousands of servers on it, this inventory process could take some time. Yes?
Can you limit, because if I touch off a scan like that, computer security is going to be knocking on my door about 5 seconds if I start scanning my entire company.
So do you remember I said this is something you need to communicate with the business? So it's something just normally, yes, it will scan. There are ways to limit it. I'm not a super expert in the map toolkit. I focus on SQL, but I believe there are ways where you can say, I want to scan for this, that, or the other. Yeah. Yep. So what I've done is this is a capture of, we have a database. Normally you would run a scan and create a database by saying file new. Can everyone see that in the back? Yep. So create or select a database. So if we create a database, it gives us this thing. It goes out, it scans all of the servers. And we're going to take a look at the database pane. Here you can see we went out. We scanned a mythical network. This is actually the database that ships with the demo that comes with Map Toolkit. So everything I do here, you can turn around and do at home. I didn't want to have this working on a network where you didn't have access to the machines and so on. All right, so you can see here we have 225 instances of SQL Server. No 2014s yet because we're getting ready to do our migrations. But you can see we go all the way back to SQL 2000. And you were 7.0, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. You can drill in and get these pretty pie charts to show you exactly what the distribution is. It gives you the distribution by component. So database engine, integration, analysis services, and so on. So all this is very nice. We hope they're all licensed editions, but we have developer editions, which are not licensed, right? They're part of your MSDN. But the interesting thing is here, and is here. It's cutting it off. Not good. Wow. All right. Now it's Zoom it. It's playing games with me. No, maybe it's Windows 10. There we go. Anyway, you click on this. It's going to go ahead and take all the information that's in the database, and it's going to construct an Excel spreadsheet for you. And we'll open that up. And in here, there's an overview tab that gives you the same summary of information you had, but then it drills into all the database instances. And for each instance, it gives you the characteristics, what's the product name, the server version name, what service pack it's at, the edition, whether or not it's clustered, whether it's up and running or whether it's shut down, whether it's auto start, manual start, so you can know if it's a development environment that people are shutting down, so on and so forth. And then drill in by components. And this is a really nice way to understand what's in your enterprise in terms of your SQL Server components and instances. The more important one, or the more interesting one, I guess, is we can go to the database details report. And now it gives us the breakdown here, but we go into a lot more details. The server summary is kind of like that second tab in the first Excel spreadsheet. But here you can go through and it says, could we connect to them? Just because they're there, we don't know if we can connect to them, whether they're operational, how many users are using that database, what kind of license we have on them. Again, that may influence your migration. If you have an enterprise agreement, then migrating is maybe a simple thing. If you don't, then going from 2005 to 2012, and I am not a licensing person, so I will push all licensing questions to our Microsoft licensing department. But there was a major change moving to 2012 where we went to per core instead of per server. So some of this could be important. This gives you information about whether you're using Agent XP. So it drills into the things that you would necessarily. Yes, sir.
What kind of authority does the ID run through?
It generally, it's a Windows. I don't believe it's domain admin, but it's close. And the documentation calls out the explicit privileges that you need for that. And I'm sorry, I don't know those off the top of my head. But it will actually tell you whether or not the instance is available, whether it could be migrated to Azure. So let's go back here. And again, each of these panes, when you drill in, it gives you detailed information about the characteristics of the collection for that data type. In this case, we're looking to see how many could go to Azure. Not only it tells you whether you can or not, it'll tell you for each machine why it could or may not be able to be migrated. So I don't know about you, but this is stuff that we used to do manually. When I was with Avanade, before I joined Microsoft, we had a whole service offering that did this for access databases, where we'd go into your enterprise and find all the access databases. And so this is really a step in the right direction in terms of the capability to do all this analysis. Additionally, all these are additional resources down here. They're all hyperlinked. You can click to them to get more information. Any questions on the map toolkit? Again, it's not meant to be an exhaustive, we could do several hours on the map toolkit as a presentation, but it's just a general overview. Yes, sir?
So it's nice to get the visibility of the
No. It's a general purpose discovery tool, and it looks at the OS level features that will prevent it. We'll look at some other things as we move forward in the tooling that will allow us to determine that. So in addition to documentation, and again, like I said, my slides are here as a roadmap. We can talk about them in any order we want. In addition to books online telling you what's deprecated, there are profiler events and extended events that you can use. So if you have your machine up and running, you've got extended events. How many people know that since 2008 you have extended events? Ooh, more than I thought. Awesome. Most people don't use it because there's no GUI, right? 2012 is when extended events took off because everybody didn't want to have to parse the XML. But you can use extended events to capture deprecated code. So you run your regular workload, or you can use the SQL Server Upgrade Advisor to take a profiler trace of an actual workload, run it through the Upgrade Advisor for the version you want to go to, and it will flag all the deprecated or unsupported, which will give you a good idea of what remediation you have to do in your code if it's code-based. Other questions? All right. I got to get rid of these, so. Nope. That was close. Anybody wants to grab it? I'm not a ball player, obviously. All right. Where were we? We are back on. Now everybody's thinking, what question can I ask? Oh. So what are we going to do? The two ways, generally, that you can move from one version to another are pretty simple. They're either side-by-side, where you'll be running two systems, the old and the new. A lot of financials will do this so that they can do and decide that everything is, they'll run parallel streams and make sure that the results are the same, so on and so forth. It's okay. We'll talk about some of the downfalls, like it's really hard to roll back if something goes wrong in the middle of the upgrade. And we'll talk, not side-by-side. Side-by-side is good for the upgrade. I'm sorry, it's the other one. The in-place is nice. You don't have to have extra hardware. You upgrade in place. The machine names don't change. So it's very good that way, but then you have the issue where if something tanks in the middle, your rollback is drop the database, get your last good known full backup, which you should have taken as part of your runbook before you started to do the upgrade, and so on. So again, side-by-side is generally what you'll see in things like ERPs or financials, those kinds of systems where you have to have guaranteed consistency before and after. How many have seen the new query data store stuff? Anybody see those sessions? Yeah, that's going to be exciting, right? Because now this whole risk of in place because, we upgraded to a new version and suddenly the cardinality estimator is giving me bad plans and my system's tanking. You just go into QDS and now it's working just as well as it would have. It's awesome. Anyway, I digress. They're side-by-side. You can roll back because generally until you commission the new machine, nobody's going to be using it anyway. But it gives you the ability to fully configure your machine and then compare it. Again, you can use Map or some of the other tools to do the comparison, make sure all your configuration settings are the same, so on and so forth, except for the ones that might have changed as you're doing your upgrade that you want to take advantage of. It's not a downside, but it's just something that, again, you have to coordinate with the business, is that the application tier is now going to have to change the connection string, right? Unless you're going to do something strange like turn the old machine off, do a sysprep, rename the whole server back to the old machine name. Most people won't go to that trouble. They'll go to the trouble of changing the connection string, which, if you're a good developer, it's in a config file and it's not hard-coded and so on and so forth. We were talking earlier about being able to swap out machines underneath. One other thing that you could do is if you have an A record for your machine in DNS, you could add a C name or a canonical name on top of it and only have your connection string point to the canonical name. Then it doesn't matter what you change the machine out underneath. The canonical name, you have to update the C name record to point to the current A record. So it's another way to do that without having to go touch all the connection strings. Okay. Yes? Okay?
How do you actually benchmark these kind of scenarios? Like there are two samples. One is sample and one is comparison.
Right.
How I can actually what are the significant metrics I need to collect and publish before and after?
Okay, that's a good question. As a buddy of mine said this morning, a good question is something on this slide. A great question is on one that's coming up on another slide, and that's coming up. I like that. I'm going to use that all the time now. That's awesome. So I learned something this week. It's great. In place, again, I'm not going to read it to you. We already talked about this. Like I said, I get ahead of my slides. The biggest problem that we see most often is if you have multiple applications on a given instance of SQL Server, they all have to be able to move to that new version when you're doing an in-place upgrade. You can do some playing around with the DB compatibility levels, right, on the databases, but in some instances, you may run into some issues there. For example, if you have a SQL Server instance and you have an ISV package that's on it, just setting the compatibility level on that database may leave you in an unsupported state with your vendor, right? So those are the kinds of things. You have to be sure that if they're not all internal applications, they're packaged applications, that they're all certified. And I work a lot with ISVs. That whole process of certifying on the next version of SQL Server is generally, if you're a rapid adopter, your vendor packages are going to be behind you. But again, in a lot of the verticals, people take some time to make the migration. So how do we get there? We're only going to go back as far as SQL Server 2000 SP4. Sorry. If you have... Oh, okay. You're not going to upgrade it? Okay. You would have to do an extra step on the left side of this slide that's not there. You would have to upgrade from 7.0 to SQL 2000 and then take another step. So end goal here, 2014 is just another endpoint at the other end. One thing to note is we generally will support 2 major versions in arrears for direct upgrade. So if you wait to 2016, then you're looking at being able to upgrade from 2012. But if you go to 2014, then you can get there from 2008 R2 or any of the 2005, and then the migration is just an in-place or a supported upgrade to the 2016. So what do? Can't go directly from 2000 SP4 to our target, so we have to take some extra steps. Again, it's not a good story for us. We're making you do these extra steps, but again, you can understand that adds some of that complexity to your migration project, right? You have to do this testing. How does the test go from 2000 to 2005 before I then make the jump? And we're going to want to do iterative testing. If we have the, let's say we migrate from 2000 to 2005, but now we see that, oh, my query plans are horrible. Do I really want to migrate then to 2012 and try to track it down? Or do I want to understand that from 2000 to 2005, the stats changed? And so updating the stats on all my tables before I do an additional migration would have been a good thing. So lots of little gotchas. Likewise, click, there we go. You can go any of the other supported versions. But again, moving forward, it's going to be 2 major versions. And then 2014, of course, can't do that at all. All right, so gratuitous animations are over. All right, yes. Sorry. Do we still have the product group name? No. Sorry, I was given some of these slides. All right, I think you all get the idea. It's multi-step. Yes. Multi-step. So there are some resources slides, like I mentioned, at the end of the deck that will give you some additional information to look for backwards compatibility, for SSIS going to later versions, so on and so forth. SQL Server Books Online. The first thing you should do when you get a new version of SQL Server is open Books Online, look at what's new in SQL Server to get excited about the new features, and then look at what's been deprecated. We always list deprecated or listed for deprecation. One means we've said that we're going to get rid of it, and in no less than 2 major versions later, we may actually get rid of it. I leave that out there because there's some stuff that, like text and text image, that we marked for deprecation. I think it was in 7.0, and it's still there. So, but that's important to know, that if I have something that has been deprecated, let's say you're going from 2000 SP4 and you're going to 2012. Like I mentioned earlier, the outer join syntax, the star equals or equals stars, has to be remediated into outer join syntax. Yes?
Another issue you're going to find from migrating for such a long time ago to now is the Windows operating system that's installed on, that's not going to be supported for the newer version of SQL. So a lot of times these, especially when you're going for such a long distance between products, you're going to have to migrate to a different box anyways, because the operating system is not going to.
For those of you who may not heard it, and for those that are listening to the recording after the fact, this gentleman brought up a great point, that the older versions of SQL were supported on older versions of the operating system. And if you need to migrate to a newer version of SQL, it may no longer be supported on an older version of the operating system, which kind of ties your hands, and you have to do the side-by-side rather than the in-place. Thank you. That was good. Breaking changes, if we've changed syntax, things like backup scripts that you don't really give too much of a thought about, but it's part of the surface area of the database where we've deprecated with truncate only, for example, in the backup of a log. The backwards compatibility is documented by component. So if you're using SSIS, then you can go through and say, here are the breaking changes, here are the deprecated features. In some cases, it's fairly minor. In some cases, moving to SSIS-DB as your catalog versus a 2000 repository or a file store repository, that is a major undertaking. I thought I mentioned it here, but maybe not. It's probably on another slide. If you go to extended events, there is a deprecated features and a deprecated final notice, which I thought was kind of cool that they named it that. One is, here we're telling you it's going to go away. No, it's really going to go away. So if you capture that on your work stream, I don't know how many of you are using extended events much. They're fairly lightweight, especially for something like that, where hopefully you're not going to have all that many planned or currently deprecated events. So having that running and be able to proactively know that, hey, we have some code that needs to be remediated, or we have some features that we need to be prepared so that the migration can be useful. Extended events, you can do it with Profiler also. They have the same deprecated events class. All right, analysis. There's a lot of data. We talked about all the different things you could get from the map toolkit. That gives you the broad brush across all of your enterprise. But for a given database instance, there's a lot of data you're going to want to capture before you upgrade. Let's say I have a small in-house line of business application, and I upgrade it from 2005 to 2012. Were there any problems? I don't know. Did you baseline? Do you know what the metrics are? Do you know what the CPU utilization was? Do you know what your IOPS were? Do you know, how much memory you're using? Those are all important pieces to capture both before and after your upgrade. So you can say, one, it hasn't regressed, right? It hasn't gotten any worse. We hope that doesn't happen. But also to say that here's the areas where, okay, this is high CPU, we're seeing this, let's address that before we do the migration. So maybe do some tuning beforehand so that you get the apples to apples. Yep. One thing that those Excel spreadsheets are really good for is the map gives you a name. And normally everybody has really clever server naming, East RQ S953S. Okay? Go through and add a column and document the business use for that server, so you know the current business stakeholder that you have to work with as you're planning your migration process. So, again, most people use cryptic server names, but that's just something you need to capture there. All right. So lots of changes. The systems, they do roll pretty quickly. The data platform is generally moving far in advance of in-house applications. Some is we just don't have the time to do the migrations and upgrades. The others are we're reluctant until Service Pack 1 comes out. I hate to say that, but that's a common thing I hear, which just take that excuse and put that one out the door. The quality bar now for the Service Pack and for the RTM is much different than it was, say, in 7.0 days. Yeah, it's you're safe with RTM. In some cases, let's say we're moving to a new version of SQL, you may need to update your ODBC providers for your client code. So that's something that you have to be aware of. It's not just the database anymore. I mean, we have far reach, right? We are involved in every aspect of business. The database is the king, that's my opinion, but everybody needs us. All right, so what can we do? We prefer that you get a set of metrics, and I'm going to give you a demo here that's going to ease your analysis of the metrics. But things like capture CPU, capture page life expectancy, catch buffer hit ratio, transactions per second, batches per second, disk read and write latency, bytes read and read. Yes?
Curious why you're going through all that. 'Cause if I'm going to buy a brand new server and we do it side by side, I'm going to buy really super hardware. I'm going to get it up, so it can run these things decently. So I don't see how weight on an old machine, weights, unless I'm missing something.
No, I didn't say wait. I'm talking about the resources.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because if I upgrade to a new version of SQL and suddenly my exact same workload was running at 40% CPU and is now at 90% CPU, I need to know that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with virtualization. That adds the extra wrinkle. We want to capture periods for perfmon or profile or whatever vehicle you're going to use. Capture it for different times during the day. First thing in the morning, right after lunch are generally good times when people are logging into the systems. Things like end of week or end of month processing when reports are being run. Make sure you include, that 2 a.m. in the morning SQL job that's running to do batch processing, because it's important to understand the characteristics of that. So get a broad brush look at everything that's available. Yep. Click. All right. How do we interpret it? You have to understand what's important to you. A DBA for a packaged product has one set of concerns. Somebody else that's doing line of business applications for the business has a different set of concerns. Somebody that's just administrating a whole bunch of servers just wants to respond to all the alerts they get from all the tools you saw down at the expo hall. We want to look at baselines. We want to capture the baseline before and after upgrade. And then we also need to understand that, okay, as we're planning, we're going to be moving probably to a new server, new operating system. Can we take advantage of any of those features? And how fast has the database grown over time? Do I need to have more disks? Do I need to say, oh, you know what, I've got plenty of files for TempDB. They're all equally sized, but I'm still seeing TempDB as being slow. Do I need to plan as part of the migration process for this particular application to put in SSDs for TempDB? Right? So this is all things that you can do. Look at the growth over time and try to project that planning. Tooling. This is probably what everybody's really been looking for. Bunch of tools. One looks at the current system, like the map toolkit, and then the other one is for testing new systems and then capturing and analyzing. So what do we got? We got all kinds of tools. I'm not going to drill deep into many of them. We'll talk about all of them. I'll do a demo of both the perfmon integration with performance analysis of logs. Anybody used PAL before? Okay, the guys that actually go home at night, good. PAL is an amazing tool. It's up on Codeplex, and again, the links are in the resource slide at the end of the deck. Essentially, it churns through perfmon logs, BLGs, and produces a very nice report as an HTML report with graphs. It says, oh, you're at this point and you've exceeded this threshold, which we say is good for SQL Server, and here's a link to go find out more about how to troubleshoot it. It makes you look like a genius to management because you can cut and paste all this stuff and make a nice Word document report. It's awesome. SQL Trace or SQL Profiler, whatever you want to call it, obviously that can be used to capture workloads. We'll use that traditionally as an input to the database upgrade advisor, especially if your code is not contained primarily in the database. Let's say you have a mid-tier that's written in Java and you do a lot of Java calls or dynamic SQL. You have to have some way to examine those workload of the T-SQL coming to the database to see if it's going to cause problems for your upgrade. So we use SQL Trace, Capture Profiler Trace, that's what we were talking about early in the morning, end of month processing, and you run this all through the database upgrade advisor, and it will give you any known gotchas in terms of upgrading. Pardon? The upgrade advisor? Oh, Profiler, yes. Yes, at some point, database, yes, thank you. So Profiler is on that deprecated list, which I'll be retired before they actually get rid of it, just because so many people have such a large investment. But the motion is to extended events, and at some point in the future, I don't know about 2016, the database engine advisor will take an XEL file, so an extended events file, and do the same kind of processing that you would do. Thank you for pointing that out. RML utilities were written by our support engineers for themselves. Our customers said, whoa, wait a second, what are you doing? How are you doing that? Can we have it? And so they produce these products that take large profiler traces, they crunch them all down, they normalize your Transact SQL, aggregate statistics like logical reads, physical reads, CPU, all of that, and give you nice, pretty reports that allow you to drill down into your worst performing queries. Of course, now with Query Store, that would probably go away. RML utilities will also allow you to take a single profiler trace and split it into multiple RML files, one per SPID. So if you've captured, 1,500 concurrent users on this profiler trace, you can produce 1,500 files that can then be replayed with OStress, which is a utility that allows you to replay SQL at a rapid pace, which is also part of RML utilities. So you can use this to analyze your worst performing queries, the characteristics, so on and so forth. Best practices analyzer is more of a system checklist type thing. It goes, okay, are logs on a separate drive than the data files? No, flag it. Has a backup been done in the last 7 days? No, fire them. Flag it. Anyway, it's similar to some of the health checks that Premier provides. Premier health checks are much more in-depth, and there's a lot more involved in them, and you get a lot more value out of them. SQL Nexus is another Codeplex project. Anybody use Codeplex before? Yeah, good, good. Like that. It's our open source repository. I've got several tools up there that you're welcome to take a look at. SQL Nexus was a conglomeration of a bunch of different people working on it. I think Jack Lee in our support group is continuing to support it. It's like RML utilities, but it will also read perfmon counters and other custom scripts in and do the same kinds of things. We use it internally a lot. It just, as a DBA, there's a lot of mundane, repetitive tasks that you have to do, and basically a lot of these tools will help you to do them a lot quicker and a lot more accurately than if you're doing them by hand. Let's take a look. I know, I've got to wake it up. There we go, and then I'll switch. How are we doing? Well, we're doing good. So any questions? Yeah, so this is generally what you look at. This is, all right, how many of you have used SQL Diag before? A couple couple people. All right. How many of you have been forced to use PSS diag before? Okay, you've called in for support. Same thing. A lot of people were like, oh, we can't run PSS diag in production, when in fact, since SQL 2005, SQL diag, which ships with the product, just PSS diag just calls SQL diag. But anyway, there's different customizations. This is just a generalized SQL diag. Just take all the defaults. Obviously, if we were trying to analyze that, it's ridiculous. So let's go to the baking show. We have one of these. So what I did is I took that particular BLG, so this is exactly the same, and I ran this tool. There's two different installs. This is the latest one, doesn't have an installer, so it doesn't add a shortcut. But I'm going to just show you this, and then we'll do the finished cake, pull that out of the oven, because this takes a while to process. Essentially what this isn't just for SQL Server either. What you can do is you pull in a log, a BLG file, and then you say, well, what kind of server is this? And where is it? Do my obligatory zoom it so we get the good evaluations at the end. But you can see we support large numbers. You've been there before. So we support a large number of standard templates. These templates, so this is, again, a Codeplex project written by Clint Huffman. But the templates are produced by Microsoft employees in their respective specialties. Like Dave Pless did the SQL Server one. He's in PFE. Go back here. And we choose SQL Server. And so they even give you their email. So if you have a problem with the template or you want to ask other questions, you can contact them. Really nice. Anyway, there's some questions about how many processors, and is this an OLTP versus a data warehouse type stuff, where you want to put it, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, I'm not going to evaluate it because that does take a while. And with this current version of Windows 10, my screen disappears. So we will go. So that same BLG file produces this HTML file, which is supported, there we go, supporting all of the graphs and text that you're seeing coming up here. So here, it's very hard to see, I understand that. But it gives you a chronological order of events, things you should be worried about. Again, the events and the warnings and stuff aren't really where we're focused for this, but we want to look at the characteristics of key things. So let's go to some key things. So here, I just jumped to the logical disk, average disk second per read, so your latencies. Here we see we are peaking out. We're way over what we would want for the disk second per read. Again, it gives you some information, some ideas of what we expect to be appropriate, what you want to have before and after. And we're going to move ahead. I won't spend too much time. But we do this for each of those counters. There'll be a description. There'll be a graph that'll give you some information. The graphs are actually stored separately, individually in that subfolder. So if you ran this before and after, you could actually bring the two graphs up next to each other and see that the characteristics are similar or that you see changing characteristics. Hopefully, in many cases, the performance type characteristics will be better. All right. And let's see, how are we doing on time here? We'll be close, but we'll make it. All right. All right, so that was PAL and Perfmon. I don't just look at PAL files, BLGs anymore. PAL is the way to go. All right, so what else can we do? DMVs, hopefully by now, if you're at 2005 or later, those DMVs should be your friends. You should be comfortable with them. If not, here's a sales pitch. Microsoft Premier Services offers performance tuning optimization and architecture workshops, which takes you from the Windows thread level all the way through 400 level material, introduces you to all the DMVs, and teaches you how to troubleshoot like a Microsoft engineer. It's a 4-day workshop. If you have a Premier contract, contact your TAM or ADM. All right, I have to do that. I'm required by law. So you can collect things such buffer pool. How's the buffer pool being used? File access patterns. One thing that a lot of people didn't necessarily realize if they didn't dig into the documentation was everybody thought 2005 to 2012 was a pretty straightforward migration. There was a major change in the memory manager from 2005 to 2012. So understanding the impact of that, you definitely need to keep track of that. There are some functions that need to be treated carefully. If you're using recommitted snapshot isolation database option, there are several DMVs that please do not run in production. The top version store generator and top versions, there's 2 of them. They're massively invasive, and they will eat every CPU cycle on your box for a heavily loaded system. They are documented that they're not meant to be used in a production environment. And again, I also mentioned this earlier, the extended events can be used to capture deprecated. And it's actually just an event. If you pull up the new session wizard, just type deprecated, and the 2 deprecated and deprecated final notice will come up, and you can use those. So we've gotten, and we're ready, and we've got a hardware box, we've got a SAN or direct attached storage, whatever it is we're using. We need to understand, will the new system, characteristics of the I/O subsystem, meet the needs that we had in our old system? So now we know what our IOPS per second were. We used our PAL tool to get all that great information. We know our read and write latencies, disk queues, things like that. We look at that. We can use SQL I/O. SQL I/O is strangely named. It was written in the SQL product group, but has absolutely nothing to do with SQL Server. It was designed originally to stress I/O subsystems to see what the maximum IOs per second, or IOPS, could be. So there's no database, there's no application. You're just taking the raw hardware, driving it as hard as you can, giving it different file sizes, random access, direct access, sequential, giving it a different workload to get an output of the kind of characteristics you have your I/O subsystem. You will never get better than what you have on IOSIM. Well, you're generally going to get something less than what you would get on SQL I/O because of the fact that once you layer additional applications and everything on top of it, there's some overhead. SQL IOSIM is similar to SQL I/O, but it's actually set up to do the patterns that you would see. So sequential writes for a transaction log file while you're having random reads and writes for your data files. So it just tries to simulate the patterns a little better. Again, both of these are free. You can download them off of Microsoft.com. They have volumes of documentation. If you go to the PSS SQL CSS engineers blog, there are blog posts about effective ways of using this. Many of the industry folks like Paul Randall, Brent Ozar, names you may have heard, they have all blogged about the tools and the use of them. So this lets you know, okay, we had 1,000 IOPS on our old system. We just did SQL IOSIM, and I'm getting about 1,200 IOPS. Okay, the disk IO subsystem that they provisioned for us is no worse than the old one. Just gives us that confidence. Relog is actually used under the covers by PAL, and it takes the BLG files and parses them out to get all the counters and can put them in a different format. The PAL tool just puts them in that format and produces the report for you. Log parser is also using. And Excel, generating pretty pictures for management. I think that's their tagline anyway. I'm not sure. All right. Testing. What should I test? Pardon? No, the flip side is everything, especially if you're going from physical to virtual. Virtualization does add some overhead. There are best practices white papers up on SQLcat.com on using SQL Server in a virtual environment. Things like whether you use pass-through disks or not, and how to do the networking. Do you want to do physical disks, physically attached disks to the VM, all of that kind of stuff. Again, the production hardware and the pre-production systems, that's kind of the SQL IO sim that we were talking about. Make sure there's things that people tend to forget. Let's say you've done a really great job analyzing one database application. On the fiber, you realize that the HBA queue depth was only 32, so you pump that up, and now you've commissioned this new box, and for some reason it's not in your checklist, and your HBA queue depth's back down to 32, and all of a sudden your IOs go, and you don't understand why. So just, you have to do the pre-production and the old system and test them. It's a moving target, right? So the OS and SQL all have patches. Well, maybe not coming forward. Patch Tuesday's going away. Everybody happy about that? Dead silence. Okay. Yeah. 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 All right. We'll save that for another time. But pick a patch level. Don't try to be applying patches while you're going through this migration or upgrade process. You need to pick a target patch level and say, this is it. This is what we're supporting. Once it's been up and it's been tested at that patch level, then you can consider applying the other patches just like you would to any of your other servers in a patch scenario. How many of you, if you're an application DBA, have regression test scripts that can exercise the entire breadth of your product? Awesome. Did you get a shirt yet? Here, send this back. Sorry, I can't reach that far, but I'm going to send it back. Oh, right over his head. All right. That's awesome. When we bring ISVs and customers in the lab, generally none of them have that. But that's, I'm being facetious. Nobody really does full regression testing, but you should have at least a basic validation smoke test that you can run to ensure that core performance, maybe it's simply you migrate, you attach with your application, you check the client UI timings to see whether or not they're equivalent. But the best case, obviously, is if you want to exercise the whole process, is to have a test suite, TFS, right? Team manager, something like that, to run the tests. And again, you want to, if you have that and it's automated, then it makes this next step is each time you're going to make a configuration change, let's say there's a new feature, auto parameterization. You're coming from SQL 2000 and you want to do force parameterization. You want to be able to test the before and after effects of changing that configuration item and to see, does your throughput improve, do your response times drop, so on and so forth. All right. Yep, airport. All right. Again, it's, I hate to say it, but this is really a PM needs to, or someone with PM-like skills should be driving this. This should be a project that you do. That middle one, upgrades, can be high pressure. I put can, they generally are, because to be honest, if these are mission critical or business critical processes, you have a very small window to accomplish this, and that's why the testing is such an important part. And the rollback plan, obviously, again, like we said, is if you're using in place, there really is none, other than having good backups of all your databases, detach them all, restore them all, and after you've reinstalled SQL. So it's not a pretty picture. All right, I think we're near the end. Again, the business, this is traditional project management. Somebody needs to have the ownership of saying, yes, we have a go or a no-go, and it needs to be a binary. Not, well, we think we can go this weekend. You have to have a meeting. Somebody has to sign off on it and decide, yes, and it's all got to be based on facts, analytical facts that are provable, not like, no, I feel really good about this. Okay? Again, this is just business stuff. The product group asked me to put this in. Okay. So some resources. Again, there's links for all the different tools that I referred to. The slide deck should be up by tomorrow on Channel 9. Question? Yes, sir?
Before you move on, I know you're running out of time. I apologize.
No, I'm in my Q&A area.
We're comfortable in our area about moving through the technical, migrating SQL servers. What about SSRS? What are those gotchas? That's what scares us.
Yeah. What version to what version?
We're going from 12 to 14.
That's not too bad. Are you using integrated or SharePoint form?
Integrated.
Okay. Nothing jumps out at me right off the top of my head, but RS, IS, and AS are not, I'm generally core engine, but from remember reading through those, I don't believe there was any major breaking changes there. 2012 to 2014 was pretty good there. So integration services backwards compatibility. Yeah. It's not a great story. Especially if you're going from the earlier versions to the later versions, we introduced SSIS-DB, which is the catalog. We introduced environments. We introduced a lot of changes in the way you deploy and execute your packages. And unfortunately, when you open it in the new tool, it will offer to upgrade it for you. Pardon? Up to 2008 R2, right. Right. But the later versions, you can open other DTSX projects, right? DTSX, right, not DDS, right. Other than that, obviously I can't refer you to any other sessions because it's the last one. You have my contact information. If you have further questions, I can get somebody from Integration Services. If you're having specific problems, just send me an email, bob.taylor@microsoft.com.
We decided early on to go side by side, and that's kind of why, there's like all those scheduled reports, and so.
Right. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you. Make sure you fill out the evals. They're on a totally separate cycle, and most ISVs will only certify their product on certain versions, and in some cases, only certain service packs or CUs of a product. And we don't have any leverage to make the move, and I don't know that you have a much better answer there. I'm sorry. Although with the new query store in 2016, if something changed in our product that the ISV hadn't tested and anticipated, you could pin it back to an old force plan, which could help. Other questions? Yes?
We have time. I'll just stand.
Sure. Let's see, because I have 5 minutes and 38 seconds. Unless we both talk really fast, I don't think we'll get them all in. Other questions? Not really. The only thing is it's because Service Broker is contained in internal tables within your database, right? The database engine upgrade advisor might catch anything. Service Broker has been fairly stagnant for a number of editions, so I don't think we'll see changes in that surface there. I don't see most of the... Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the technology is rock solid, and it was the basis for the Azure Service Bus, so... Yep. Yes, sir?
The majority of our base is on 2008 R2. Can you say off the top of your head or direct to a particular place that you can find what are the major gotchas for 2008 R2 to either 2012?
Yes. It's these backward compatibilities. So if you choose 2012 and you look at the backwards compatibility and deprecated features for each of the engine components, then it will have that for you. It'll tell you here it is, and here's the remediation in most cases. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. The major one is the cardinality estimator. It was rewritten for 2014. And if you have queries that are not performing as well as they used to in 2012, there is a trace flag you can use for that query. It's called Query Trace On, that allows you to apply the trace flag for that one query, and it will then fall back to the SQL 2012 cardinality estimator for that particular one. But that's the main one there that I know of. All right, let's see. I have almost 3 minutes left. Do we have some other questions? Oh, we can get started with yours. They're going to shut us off, though, so it won't go on the recording. All right, well, thank you very much. Please yeah, okay. Fill out your evals so I can come back next year.